Good morning, and thanks for joining us today. I'm your host, Justin Zaremba with NJ Cannabis Insider, and this is Cannabis Legalization in Your Town. Our 90-minute program is broken into 3 segments with an opening Q&A and 2 panels. Thanks to our local sponsor, the BGill Group, a government affairs and public relations and digital communications firm that has been at the front and center of the development of the Garden State's effort to expand and improve the existing medical cannabis program while supporting a sensible and justly and highly regulated adult use cannabis industry. NJ Cannabis Insider is a weekly trade journal produced by NJ.com covering the politics, policies, and people shaping the industry locally and nationally. Find us at njcannabisinsider.biz. Before we move on to our Q&A with the head of the state medical cannabis program, Jeff Brown, I've got a couple of housekeeping items. If you're tuning in today, be sure to let us know in the chat where you're joining us from. We'd love to hear from you. If you'd like to see all the speakers on the screen at the same time, be sure to hit the gallery view on the top right of your screen. Next up is my pre-recorded interview with Jeff Brown. He's on vacation this week, but he agreed to join us in this way for today's presentation. So we're going to tune into that, and then we'll be coming back live for our 2 panels. Enjoy. Welcome to NJ Cannabis Insider Live. Joining me today is Jeff Brown, the head of the state medical cannabis program. Thanks for joining us, Jeff.
Hi, Justin. Happy to be here.
Always a pleasure. So we've faced a lot of challenges in the past few months, especially the Department of Health, who's really had to field everything with respect to the pandemic. So how is the state medical program currently weathering all the challenges that have been thrown your way?
You know, I think all things considered, the team at the department and, most of what we're seeing from the industry has been really positive. Obviously, COVID is, it's an unprecedented challenge. New Jersey got hit particularly hard early on. A lot of us were deployed, to help out with our COVID response efforts. Many of us took on, second, third jobs. I think for a time, cannabis became my night job as we were setting up the field hospital in Atlantic City. A lot of that work continues. New Jersey's numbers are trending in the right direction overall, but, I think everybody's kind of adjusting to the new life that we all have to live in this COVID era. I think we took a number of positions and issued a number of waivers early on that I think really helped the industry adapt. First and foremost, Governor Murphy declared medical cannabis alternative treatment centers as essential businesses. And I know not every state has taken that position related to cannabis businesses. Usually with medical they have, but in recreational states it's been a mixed bag. But that was really I think a big help because when that call was made, we were seeing really extensive lines at our ATCs at a couple in particular, and because people were fearful that like restaurants and like other places, they would ultimately be shut down and they wouldn't need to get their cannabis. So, that number one. Number two, we put into place a process that allowed ATCs to onboard employees more quickly. So like other essential businesses, when they had employees whose kids were home from school, just maintaining their workforce became challenging. And then on the other side of that, the Identico, which is the place where people have to get background checked, get fingerprinted and background checked. They were facing, the similar issues and closing certain locations. So we basically put into place a system that allows employees to get onboarded ASAP with third-party background check results while they wait for their state-run background check results to come in. Curbside pickup was a big one. The team really worked hard to figure out that system. We put out a waiver on that. We now allow volume-based discounts, which is not something that we've ever done. Traditionally, we've only allowed discounts for seniors and veterans and minors and people on government assistance. But to encourage people to buy more at once, we allow for volume-based discounts. We allow ATCs to do consultations via, basically over the telephone, telephonically, or via Zoom like this, or other avenues. Most recently we did the home delivery waiver, and we currently have 2 pretty extensive home delivery plans that I think we're rounding the stretch on reviewing.
Okay, and when you say rounding the stretch, is there any sort of timeline yet for when that might be implemented?
I mean, I don't have a specific timeline. I think, we'll be working with the ATCs individually on anything that they need to address in their plans, but the goal is to get those operationalized as quickly as possible. We know patients want it. We just need to be able to regulate it effectively, and we need to know that the ATCs are operationalizing it in a responsible manner.
Okay. Has there been any sort of noted response with respect to the telemedicine waiver that has been put in place?
Just a clarification, that did not come from DOH. We worked with our partners over at the Consumer Affairs to get that done. They put in the work to get it done. They issued that. We haven't gotten any specific response at the department. But what's interesting is that throughout this pandemic, we've seen doctors continue to sign up. I think we've seen, honestly, an uptick in the number of patients signing up every month. We've also seen more turnover in terms of patients dropping out of the program. But overall, last month we signed up more than 5,000 new patients, which is, it seems like every month it's an all-time high as far as new patient signups.
Mm-hmm. Okay. That's interesting. And so what's active participation then?
Last I looked, I want to say we're somewhere around like 84,000 range.
Okay. All right. So, turning to home rule, because I did promise for the event that we're doing. There's a lot of, especially with municipalities, they have a great number of concerns about anything new, especially something like cannabis, medical cannabis, that while it's been around in the state now for over a decade, you still have some folks who are quite reticent about it. So could you maybe tell us a little bit more to what extent the current law and regulation surrounding the medical program impacts on home rule?
Well, let me just say this. Just overall, I think, having been, at the department for the last 2.5 years now, just about, what I've seen is that generally municipalities are pretty open to medical. And that seems to be tracked with the general population. If something's medical cannabis, although, maybe not embraced by pharmaceutical companies and, hospital executives, et cetera, for any number of reasons, when it comes to, sort of the average citizen, it's pretty well accepted at this point. And that seems to be the case when a town is considering whether or not to allow a medical cannabis business to operate there. I think that they have questions. It's not something that a lot of people have seen up close and personal, so there's that level of uncertainty there. But generally, they'll come around to the medical prospect. I think a lot of the hesitancy that certainly I've seen since being in this position is the hypotheticals related to adult use. What is that going to look like? Will we allow a medical provider in, and then ultimately we'll end up with an adult use dispensary in our town? I think that's a lot of where the hesitancy comes from. I have an opportunity through my job to interface with a lot of regulators in a lot of other states. And I think what we see across the country, and this has certainly changed since, states have really put into place strong regulatory regimes, is that whether medical or adult use, these are really well-regulated programs, and they're really concerned with ensuring that the public is healthy, that the public is safe, and that the industry acts in a responsible manner. And that's true, of every state, from some of the more sort of open markets you see out west to some of the newer markets out east. And I think that as this industry matures in New Jersey, and as towns, municipalities, as local officials see the way that we intend to lead in the medical program, certainly, and put public health first and the safety of patients first. My hope is that folks start to come around and realize that this is, it's a legitimate industry. Certainly, they need to do their due diligence when looking at any specific company, but that we're going to do our best at the state to ensure that it's tightly regulated and safe. You mentioned home rule. One thing related to that. So we do have a regulation that requires municipal approval, and I'm not going to get into the super specifics on that because it's the subject of litigation right now. But
that's part of the reason we asked.
Yeah, I do want to say this generally though, and if you go back and you look at our rule adoption from May of 2019. There was a question related to home rule as it relates to drug-free school zones. And our general philosophy is that we want to be, we're going to have our regulations, we're going to enforce them. But, generally where appropriate, we want to be deferential to municipalities and to local governments and sort of the wants and volitions of the people who live there.
Right. And it's showing that there's an actual local buy-in on this.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, Jeff, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
There we go. Unmuted. Great. And that was Jeff Brown, the head of the medical cannabis program. Hope you're having a good vacation, Jeff. We're going to be turning now to our first panel. Is cannabis right for your town? Featuring Jen Cabrera of Vicente Sederberg, Stacey Udell of HBK Accounting, and Colleen Mahr, the mayor of Fanwood and the former president of the League of Municipalities. Thanks for joining us today.
Pleasure to be here.
Hi.
Hello, everyone. All right, so I'm just going to put this out there and feel free to jump in. What's the current state of cannabis in New Jersey?
Well, it'll be on the public ballot, right? It'll be a statewide referendum question very shortly.
And that's just for adult use, though, right?
That's correct. For, adult recreational use. The voters will decide in November.
Now, as we start to clear out of the summer and move into political silly season, though it's 2020, so who knows if it's ever stopped. Folks are going to be gearing up both on the proponent and the opponent side with respect to this ballot measure. So what are some of the most common misconceptions about cannabis and the medical cannabis program that you've seen? And I'll put this out for Jen and Stacey as well. Feel free to jump in, everyone.
Okay. I think one misconception, I'm going to focus on municipalities here. One of the misconceptions I hear a lot is a belief that, or worry, of understandable worry, that a cannabis business can force its way into your town, that it can find a property it likes and just steamroll over any local regulation. Under the current medical program as it exists, that's simply not possible. This is an incredibly competitive application process to get a license to have any kind of cannabis business in New Jersey, and you need local approval. You need not only a letter welcoming you to your town to the town from the mayor. You also need to show compliance with local zoning rules. You need to show that you are actually involved in this community and have the support of the local community. I we simply don't know what the adult use program will look like. However, given the way New Jersey's Department of Health has regulated it so far, and we don't have the commission yet in New Jersey, which is going to take over regulation of the medical and adult use market if it comes into existence, we can assume that it will, I think, be similar, allow similar protections for municipalities.
Probably a similar regulatory structure. We already have kind of a baseline in there. So to, what extent have we seen some benefits in either, this can be either in New Jersey or out of state where we have, more mature and robust cannabis industries. So what are the benefits that those municipalities have seen when they have, either allowed cannabis into town or welcomed them into town?
I'll go first on that, and then I defer to Mayor Mahr and Stacey on this. But what you see so New Jersey is going to follow really the East Coast model. It is not going to be a Wild West kind of state like California, where you simply have a massive gray market that just continues to exist, or Oklahoma, for instance, which legalized for medical use a few years ago, and it's very underregulated. They're very free market approach. New Jersey is not going to be like that. It hasn't been like that up to this date. The East Coast is doing things differently. So I think we should be looking at states like Massachusetts, honestly, for a model of how it's going to be going forward. In Massachusetts, you have something called community host agreements that all marijuana businesses need to agree with the local municipality, basically to have your license at all. And what municipalities have really been able to see as a result of these, and these have been very much abused. So, I mean, I don't want to say it's a great system for the marijuana industry. However,
some people compare them to extortion, right?
Well, yeah, but a little bit. What municipalities really can get out of this is not only tax revenue, and we can go into what the ballot initiative provides there, but also like municipalities get things like property taxes. I mean, you can also allow for local hiring preferences. Once the retail dispensaries opened up in Massachusetts, like communities are really starting to benefit. And you see parts of that state that were initially very much against cannabis businesses, for instance, Cape Cod, and that's really changed. You see more and more businesses being welcomed in because there is a financial benefit to a lot of the towns.
Thank you.
So I'll jump in since we're talking numbers, and that's kind of my area. But one of the statistics that's out there is for every dollar that's spent at a dispensary, there's another $2.50 to the local state economies. Because if you think about it, especially in New Jersey, we have lower gas prices, we have no sales tax on clothing. So if somebody once we become adult use, we'll have people, let's say we beat the other states around us to the punch, which we hope we do. People are going to come in from the other states and they're going to go to the dispensary. They're not just going to leave though. They're going to go get gas. They're going to pay using our, tolls for the roads. They're probably going to buy clothes. They're going to buy gas, all these other things. So in addition to just sales tax revenue, there's a lot of benefits that towns are going to see that, they wouldn't have seen before. In addition to that, it leads to employment, and then more employee, we obviously with COVID, we have problems with unemployment, and this is something that can bring more jobs in. It's not just the person that sells at the dispensary, but it's all the people that work at the cultivation facility and processing. So there's a lot of jobs that will be available, which will enable those employees then to spend more money. We'll be able, businesses are going to need real estate. So properties that may have been sitting empty might be able to be, rented or purchased in the future. So there's lots of different ways that cannabis can bring a lot of money into the municipalities and to the state as well.
Thank you. Mayor Mahr, did you have anything to add?
Sure. So I think in the short time that we've been on, we've kind of covered a lot of different questions here. So I think I want to take a couple steps back. So where are we really? We are ready to probably see campaigns start about the ballot question, whether it's for or against. Let's say it passes, well, then what's the next step? There has to be a piece of enabling legislation. So for us, we've spent a tremendous amount of time. When I say us, the New Jersey League of Municipalities and an array of mayors have really spent a lot of time to make sure that local control, opting in or out, depending on how it's going to be worded, local control remains steadfast. That when it comes to the benefits, we'll see. We'll see what the benefits are, right? We'll see, because we believe that the ballot question is poorly written in the sense of really understanding what the local tax implication will be for us, because it really says if authorized by the legislature, a municipality may pass a local ordinance to charge a local tax. Now, the idea of the tax, if for those of us who've been around for the last 2 years talking about the legislation, that local tax was a source of great conversation, right? Depending on the license, was going to be depending on the percent that the local government could stay. So all of that is really up in the air as far as we see it. We see that that's going to be an issue. We can't lose sight of the expungement issue. That was a big piece for us on the local level that we don't hear anybody talking about anymore. The fact that in 2019, we attempted to pass a piece of legislation and couldn't get it done, and sort of then punted back to the voters to decide. We're just going to see where the vote goes and then where the legislation is, because that's our concern. Because if we don't understand really what the real benefits are in writing for us, then you're going to have a harder time to convince that mayor to opt in, or an easier time for the mayor to opt out if he's feeling pressure.
Right. I mean, looking at the ballot question, I mean, the fact that it is open, they have, language in there to some extent, like, highlighting that there's going to be like tax implications for local towns. I'm sure that's the primarily like a big interest when it comes to municipalities.
I think it's one of. I don't think it's the one, to be honest with you. Like I said, I think how they deal with the expungement and social justice issue is a big piece for many, many of our mayors. And if anyone was around in the last 2 years with the conversation, you saw where the urban mayors were on this issue and the support or lack of support that they were given to the legislation if they did not join this. So whether or not that helped to derail it, people can weigh in on that, but the local control, the opting in or out, the expungement, and being able to have some control over local revenue coming in, I think would be all equal.
Mm-hmm. Right. So in the event of legalization, it is likely that we are going to see taxes above and beyond the current state sales tax with respect to adult use cannabis. In some states, we're quick to set high tax rates, but in some of those cases, we saw that many consumers driven over to the illicit market. So do we know a figure or the right rate when it comes for meeting the needs of the industry, municipalities, while de-incentivizing the illicit market?
Well, I don't know that we know the platonic ideal tax rate. However, we do basically know what the New Jersey tax rate will be, because the ballot initiative ties our hands, unfortunately. It states if you read the proposed constitutional change that will be put in place, it states that cannabis, retail purchases of cannabis can only be subject to the sales tax, period. Now, perhaps there is possibility for there to be a transfer tax between like a grower and a processor to transport or something like that. That's not excluded, obviously. Then as far as municipalities go, they are allowed to impose an additional tax of no more than 2% of receipts from each sale, which really does seem to tie the hands of municipalities. And I think that Mayor Mahr makes a good point, which is that we don't actually know how any of this is going to be implemented. We had like a couple years of back and forth of trying to see any adult use legislation get through a Democratic controlled legislature, and we weren't able to do it. So like, let's see, it's not like we work quickly in this state. So it could be a couple of years before we actually get any of this implemented. So I don't think it makes sense for any municipality to jump on a bandwagon. You'll have plenty of opportunities later.
And I also think that, you know, everyone is watching the rollout of the medical, right? And what's happened to that, right? And the expansion of that, or lack of expansion of that. And then the lawsuits that have come, and everything seems to be just stopped, you know? So I think, you know, how we watch what's happening on the state, do that, and then watch this ballot question come up, and sort of the lobbying and the voting that's going to happen, and the next steps after it probably gets passed, and it may get passed at a very high rate, if you believe the polls. So then what, right? And so what is the state going to do? How they're going to do it? How quickly are they going to do it? And where are the municipalities? You know, are they going to pick up the piece of legislation that they left off with in 2019 that got passed into the legislature? You know, I don't know.
Well, it is New Jersey, so I wouldn't expect any land speed records when it comes to getting action done. As we've seen, with the really the CRC, or the absence thereof, that was supposed to come about, following the passage of Jay Koenig's law, but they haven't even been seated yet.
That was supposed to be created January 1st of this year.
Yeah.
And I get it, there's a lawsuit pending, and that's just holding up absolutely everything. I mean, like if you see the applicants from last summer who are still paying on a property because maybe they'll get chosen, it's a tough situation right now.
Yeah, and we're still waiting for the fall for the court to hear arguments on that particular case. We also there is also another lawsuit that was filed as part of the in response to the request for application round last year, and that one is kind of interesting because it could have potentially, though it seems kind of remote, have an impact on home rule. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
I'm not sure which lawsuit you're talking about.
There was one of the applicants who was disqualified in the previous round was challenging based on the what it means. Yeah, what it means to have the support of the local municipality. They didn't have the governing body's approval. They had other documentation that they claimed was providing that support. So, because when you look in the RFA, it doesn't clearly outline like get a like a vote, like a resolution or an ordinance from the town. Get a blessing from the mayor. It doesn't necessarily clearly outline what it is that they do. So
it doesn't. And if you look at the example, like what's happened in some other states, for instance, in Michigan, where you have an adult use program, and a lot of states have their own ordinances that allow you to get a license. Those municipalities, those local governments were denying a lot of these. These were competitive applications, and a lot of the denied applicants ended up suing the municipalities. As a result, they were awarded licenses. And so you end up creating this sort of perverse set of incentives where, like, you just sue, you get a license. And it's a tough thing because you do want to allow the municipalities be gatekeepers to an extent of what's happened in their borders.
Listen, I think you're talking about the Edison. In Edison is the case Progressive Treatment Solutions is looking to open up a facility in Edison. And I think they didn't review the application because they said it was lacking the documentation regarding community approval, which had meant local government approval or mayors. So now everything has stopped. You know, from our point of view, we looked at it as very clearly that if there was an interest, you know, there's many mayors that understood that they needed a letter or the council needed to do some sort of action, you know, that would give that application the support, so that if it did grant the license, it wasn't going to be turned upside down because the governing body didn't know it was coming in, you know. So unfortunately, everything seems to have ground to a halt, you know, and therein lies the problem, right? So it's a shame.
I know we've said this before, but I will say it again. It does, you know, based on conversations I've had with folks, it does seem like part of the reason that we don't have the CRC is primarily because of the lawsuits that have stayed the 2019 request for application process. It seems that the state may have wanted to probably close out their previous RFA before transitioning over to the CRC from the Department of Health to the CRC. But you know, we get the privilege of getting to wait for a bit longer at least, and so we'll see how everything shakes out in the fall. You know, I'd like to take a little bit more of a focus on home rule, because we had Jeff Brown before speak about it. Just want to make it abundantly clear for our attendees. Mahr, I think you'd be in a good position to provide them with more info on this. Is really to what extent do you see the current laws and regulations around medical cannabis impacting home rule?
Currently, I think, and we heard kind of what he talked about before, right? There seems to be a much more bigger acceptance of the medical and the locations, and even when those licenses were able to open up satellites in coming into different municipalities, that as long as they were abiding by the zoning, right, and they were getting their approvals and they were getting their permits to construct their facilities, we heard little to no outcry of the medical, right, and the expansion of the medical. I think that Jeff had touched upon some of the concerns about if you had the medical, what is that going to do for adult legalization? Does all those medical then show up, in a different vein in the communities who may not be there yet, with supporting a retail or a distribution center or all the different types of licenses, that are going to be available.
Okay. Anyone else want to add? All right, Stacey, I'd like to, you brought up the potential of jobs before. So I was hoping you could talk a little bit more about that and what we've seen as cannabis as a potential job creator, and something that really every state, including New Jersey, is going to need in the current during the current pandemic and recession.
Agree. So right now they're predicting, so when I say they, Marijuana Business Daily puts out a fact book, and they're saying by 2023 there could be 475,000 full-time equivalent workers in the cannabis industry. Just for a point of reference, there's just under 250,000 clergymen in the country and 84,000 veterinarians. So they're anticipating a lot of gains in cannabis. Right now, there's probably about 100, they say between 175 and 215,000 people employed by the cannabis industry as of 2019. And that's up about 40,000 for over 2018. In addition to the jobs you think about, like I mentioned before, the people that work in the dispensaries and the people that work in the cultivation and processing, there's a lot of other jobs. There's lawyers, that are going to need to be involved still, accountants. There's people working in the labs, people that work on marketing, that are specific to the cannabis industry. There's there's more technical jobs like inspection. People are going to be doing inspections, and there's going to be people working, like CRC working on the government side of things. So there's a lot of jobs that are available to be had, and security, is another job, especially while banking is an issue. Security is even more important. But
you also have, delivery services. Yeah, in New Jersey, we're moving closer to that, according to Jeff Brown.
Correct. So there's lots of different opportunities, and a lot of them don't necessarily need people with a lot of experience. I think it's we're going to be able to bring people in and train people to do a lot of jobs. And right now that's important, because I think we're going to have a lot of people switching jobs because they may have lost their job with what's been going on in 2020.
Right.
So I'd like to just comment a little, because I think everyone would agree that it could be a game changer in the landscape of jobs, because it's a brand new industry, right? And so as Stacey said, she kind of laid out all the different types of benefits and jobs that would be coming from actually a brand new industry. But from our point of view, right, it's, what do we know? We know that there's going to be licenses, and how those licenses are given out, and how those opportunities for women and minorities are able to actually get the license. And if we're going to be true to our words in the state about all the conversations we had about micro businesses, women, minority, veterans, people of color who've been disproportionately affected by, the being jailed or arrested for having marijuana. Now there's going to be this burgeoning industry with these unbelievable amounts of money, Stacey had talked about, that we can anticipate. There has to be equity. There has to be. And I think that if we don't, especially against the backdrop of what's going on nationally across the country, right, with communities going on, there is a synergy here. And I think that for mayors, we're not going to allow one without the other. I think that's very important for us to make sure that in our communities, if there's going to be opportunities, that those opportunities are given to people that look like their community and are from their community. And I think it's going to be a learning curve for both the local officials and these new entrepreneurs. And, I think it has the ability to really be a game changer for a lot of people's lives.
I'm curious, what do you think in New Jersey social equity could look like? Because everybody in other states, Massachusetts is working on their own model, and one of the most frequent things that folks trying to get into the industry note is lack of access to capital. So is there some way that municipalities or the state is able to bridge that gap to allow folks who are trying to get into the business through social equity could have more of an opportunity?
So from our point of view, right, like local government is not a bank, right? Like we're trying to keep taxes down, and we're getting, slapped every time that we, look like we do something, and we're also the collector for the schools and the counties, right? So, we can be the voice of, I think, expectations or what we want to see. But this is a very wealthy state that borders, New Jersey, New York, the tri-state area, where there's a tremendous amount of money out there, right? And so where these private equity firms are, right, are these big conglomerations that are coming from out of the country to scoop up all of these smaller companies and hiding behind LLCs and shuffling decks so that, individuals, can't have. I think that's a conversation that we started to really have when we thought legislation was moving. And now that I have not heard anyone pick that up, but I think that's why this regulatory commission is going to be really key. I think who goes on it and how we hold them accountable to make sure, that there is women and veterans and minorities that are given a real chance, not like a lip service chance, not like a token chance, right? We've all been around long enough to kind of know the difference.
Right. Well, I mean, to some extent, though, that is already outlined in the medical cannabis statute when it comes to carve-outs for women, people of color, veterans, setting that in terms of licensing and 15% mark for those folks to provide that sort of more of an equal footing. We have received a question from one of our viewers, and if you have more questions in there, folks, please be sure to drop it in the chat or send it in the Q&A so that we can see it. So speaking about the legislation, assuming the vote passes in November, what are the timelines for the state to write the legislation, or is this not determined yet? Are there any defined timelines around next steps, assuming the vote passes? Thank you, anonymous question asker.
There are no timelines in the ballot initiative or the proposed constitutional amendment. It is going to be up to the legislature and the commission how long they take. And sometimes you'll have implementing legislation that the timeline for how long it'll take for regulations to be implemented, written and implemented. Those aren't always met. So the answer is, I think that safely bet it's going to be more than a year.
I would sort of also echo that, and I would hope it's not longer than a year. And I'll use the example of the ballot question that was probably 2 to 3 years ago about giving money to libraries. You know, we all went to the ballot and we were asked a question if we would support creating a construction fund for our libraries, you know, to be able to have grants given to us. That passed overwhelmingly. And I think it took them 2 years to come out with regulations and an application, you know, to go out to the library systems in New Jersey. So, you know, I think that it would, for those of us who would want to see this move, I think it's going to be up to those who support it to have their voices heard, so it doesn't take a really long time.
Thank you. Any final thoughts from anyone? Are you optimistic about the state of New Jersey, or more frustrated than anything? A mix of both, even.
I would say overall I'm optimistic, because I think that the public support really does seem to be in favor of adult use, which I think is the right move for New Jersey. I'm optimistic that we are getting there before New York and Pennsylvania. I am cautiously optimistic that we will manage to implement this program in a somewhat reasonable time frame because of the threat of competition from New York and Pennsylvania, because there are such benefits to us if we do manage to get the program implemented quickly.
I agree with Jen on that. I mean, but it's just been such a roller coaster. I mean, how many times have we gotten optimistic thinking something was going to happen and then we go downhill? And it's just been so many times that now I feel like even if it I'm trying to think positively, once the vote once it gets passed, which I think it will, it's just going to take, I think, a lot longer than any of us want for it to roll out. And I think it's not necessarily going to be the most ideal plan, because we can't tax it the way we necessarily want to. We're going to be so limited. And I think that, that's going to be a detriment to the state down the road, us being tied by the legislature.
I would say the polls indicate that this is going to pass overwhelmingly. It's tied to, to a presidential election, which has a lot of interest. So I think turnout is not going to be the issue here. And we're all voting by mail, so people will get the ballots in their own homes, and, they'll probably talk about it, and, there'll probably be a lot of discussion, which could actually turn out to be a positive thing. I think on behalf of the League of Municipalities, who has not necessarily taken a position on the legalization itself because of our membership has been always so split, our role is to champion measures that will facilitate, municipal implementation of it, and to make sure that any town that wants it is able to still have their control, still have the benefits that will make it part of the reason why they want to have it in their community. And I think that the town will be a good neighbor as long as those who hold the license do the same.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Mahr and Stacey and Jen for joining us. Really appreciate it. This has been a great conversation. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Justin.
All right, we have to move to our second panel now. And joining us now for our second panel, we have Scott Rudder, the president of the New Jersey CannaBusiness Association. And we have Alixon Collazos of the BGill Group. Hi, Scott. Hi, Alixon.
Hey, Justin. How you doing, man?
Doing well. How are you?
Hi, Dustin.
Howdy.
Hi.
All right.
Okay, good.
So I'll just put this out there for the both of you. Can you tell us, we did talk a bit about the ballot referendum in the previous panel. Can you talk a little bit more about your concerns around the upcoming ballot referendum and what it is that you're seeing in terms of efforts, both for and against right now?
Sure. So, there's been great polling. It's been very consistent year after year about the support for adult use. I think what this year brings is a challenge. It's not really a concern, but it's a challenge for us, is if we're going to go 100% voter by mail, it'll be an unprecedented campaign. Like no one has done this before, right? So there's been no ballot initiative that we can measure that had something similar. So the get out the vote effort, the targeting messaging to different constituencies, not everybody supports cannabis legalization for the same reasons. They have different reasons why they're coming to the table. And we just need to make sure that those folks, for whatever their concerns or whatever the reasons are, that they're coming out to vote. And so that'll be a challenge that the campaign is working on right now. And there's lots of solutions and a lot of good folks that are sitting around the table that's going to implement this whole thing.
So hi Scott. So I also have, so again, a couple of things. One is that, there's a recent polling that just happened a couple of days ago. And it's very consistent with what we know. Overwhelmingly support, likely voters. So those numbers continue to be up there, like 65%. It's a likely support on likely voters, I should say. So those are really good news. But there's two concerns on that one. So one, the vote by mail is a really good point, because it's not necessarily that the support is not going to be there. We just need to educate those likely voters as to where what this is that is actually in the ballot, what position is it going to be on, because at this point, I don't think the Secretary of State has, that decision hasn't been made as to the placement of that ballot question. And that's important because I think there's going to be two more, if I'm not mistaken. I think there was another one. So that placement is important. And again, it's part of the education part. So we are pretty okay with, that is going to be passed. I think we're all optimistic on that end. But I want to go back to not being so, again, and part of the education, making sure that this campaign goes forward, is because when we talk about legislation and what kind of legislation is going to come up after, let's say, it passes, is that I think those numbers, whatever the numbers come up, will dictate the urgency of this legislation. And when we talk about how soon can we have a legislation, is it going to be a year and a half, 2 years? I think in part of it, and again, I'm just being overly cautious, is that I think some of these numbers in statewide numbers of support will dictate a little bit of that urgency from the legislation. One, that's in statewide. And also the other point that I want to say is that even in the local level, we talk about, home rule and the impact the local communities are going to have on recreational, that at this point it does look like, again, hometowns, municipalities are going to have huge say on what goes in their towns, which means that we need to emphasize, so this is the advice that that we talk to our clients, is that make sure that your community, whatever your interest is, have those numbers as well, making sure that the numbers, whatever those numbers are, that municipality comes out and besides the statewide poll, that your community that you are particularly interested, North, South, specific, just pay a little bit extra attention to that community that you eventually want to get in, or you're already in for medical. So those are my 2 points at this moment.
Well, turning back to your one point, because it's something that we've heard a lot, is education is paramount for folks. So how do you, given the constraints that we have in place for us right now, in the cannabis, industry, it's very hard for folks to be able to do any sort of advertising, just generally because it is considered federally illegal, and you have the terms and use conditions for various social media platforms that can often end up booting you off for discussing even ballot referendum issues such as this, and going door to door is not necessarily going to be an option for a lot of folks, given that COVID is still around. So how is it that what form are those efforts to educate folks going to take?
Well, there's already been a lot of community involvement, right? I mean, there's been, for the past several years, there have been, mayors have invited all of us out to, we've all been to different municipalities and talking about the benefits of legalization, the benefits of having it in your community and what you can derive from that. I think the whole COVID thing, though, has changed a lot of people's opinions, right? So there's a lot of mayors who were probably opposed last year that are going to be looking for new sources of incomes. We talked on the previous panel about the tax rate and 2% tax rate. When you're looking to laying off sanitation workers and first responders because your budgets are running out, when we're really hitting the economic crisis that we haven't felt yet. I mean, there's a lot of people who aren't paying rent. There's a lot of people who aren't paying their mortgages, and that's a lot of property taxes aren't going to go to those towns. So there's a lot of things that we have not yet felt the impact on, but a lot of these municipal leaders, these mayors, these township managers and city officials, they're looking at what other sources of revenues are they going to be able to get, and I think cannabis is going to be one. I mean, it's one of those very unique items where we're going to be able to tax at the municipal level. Aside from the hotel tax, I don't think there's any other tax in the state of New Jersey. So I think there's going to be a lot of that. And look, the world's going to be different at some level next year, whether it's a vaccine or we're talking about medication. I think there's going to be much more community engagement face-to-face than we're experiencing today in August of 2020. So if we get this ballot question passed November 3rd, enabling language, I think there'll be some urgency around that too. I mean, the polling is such that there are people discussing right now, should we do enabling legislation prior to the vote so the voters know exactly what they're voting for? So there's pros and cons to go with that. But I think that we'll see, my guess, we've all had the crystal balls and we've all been wrong at some level, right, through this process. But, it's either, my personal opinion is this is either going to happen before November 3rd, which I'm not sure if I'd even put that at 50-50 just yet. But I do strongly believe that in November, December timeframe, before we get to January 1st, 2021, that language will have been debated and voted on.
Okay. Well, hey, I think we all hope you're right on that one, Scott, but we'll see.
And I just want to say,
and
I just want to say in terms of messages, I mean, we talk about a little bit of like how to motivate. Again, there's going to be a lot of digital ads and, validators as well. But it's also the message has to be in accordance to the communities that we're speaking. I mean, to Scott's point, I mean, those local municipalities, local elected officials, local communities are going to be key to, again, we already know, we have an idea as to where the support comes from, but we also need to make sure they educate. So we're going to depend also on a lot of those smaller local organizations, and also be mindful of who your targeted audience is. Again, I do a lot of work with the Latino community. I've done, and I come in, just so you know, on cannabis, I've come now from my expertise on cannabis, but I come in from community outreach and local, in my experience with local communities and local government and campaigns and all of that. So that's where I come in terms of cannabis. And it's important to address those kinds of communities that are not equal, even in New Jersey, as tiny as we are, because we are a tiny, state. but there are a lot of different voices within the certain community. Latino communities are very different. And I don't know that you need to have a campaign in every single one of the municipalities, but you need to have some sort of measure as to who are you speaking to when you come to the Latino communities. And for example, South Jersey versus the Pattersons or the Newark, like there is different messages and also the age and the socioeconomic. So we keep thinking, because this is a campaign, so we need to be more mindful as well as what the message is. Not everybody is against or for cannabis for the same exact reasons. Same thing with the African American community. They are divided, and there are issues, among all these communities. So I think that besides your digital media and however, and I think there's going to be some radio, the message, you need to spend that time and that money to make sure that the message is properly addressed.
Well, speaking of that, since there are a lot of folks have lots of different perspectives on this, what are some of the most common concerns or complaints that you guys have heard of about cannabis companies from folks who may have a less than receptive attitude?
I think it typically comes down to a couple of things, right? So people are concerned about security. I think there's an absolute misconception how a cannabis business operates, and I think people are trying to equate, liquor stores, for example, and people loitering outside of liquor stores. Well, that just won't happen. It does not happen anywhere in the state of New Jersey at any of the cannabis dispensaries. There's a significant amount of security there. I mean, whether it's personnel, whether it's cameras. There are many studies, many statistics that point to where cannabis dispensary goes up, crime goes down in that area. And it's just because of the natural security that comes with having a dispensary. And it's been fantastic.
It's required to have 24-hour surveillance, right?
Right, 24-hour surveillance, and it's monitored by the state police. I mean, to me, it's actually in excess. I think that we're overburdening some of our dispensaries with the requirements for security. But hey, that's what the rules are. And the communities that would have those businesses in their borders should feel pleased that 24-hour state police presence right where that dispensary is. And again, you ask, and I say this all as a former mayor, I say this to my former colleagues, talk to the mayor in this town, talk to the mayor in that town. If you have a concern, call your colleague up, pick up the phone, ask him about security, ask him about loitering, ask him about kids or whatever it is. And every mayor that has one, I guarantee you, they're very favorable towards it because they see the benefit of it.
I agree. And again, I continue maybe with the same list of questions that, again, with the parking situation. I mean, these are, whether it's parking, what does my town look like? It's going to be, will there be lines outside the store? I mean, obviously, this is previous, COVID-19, obviously. These, and then again, it's education. So I think these are the same concerns that I think most people come into those towns. Again, I have a list. Would it be taxing on the police force? I have this one because is it going to be a burden to the police force in the town? So these are a legitimate question from a town. But once you have that education piece and you explain to mayors and they come satisfied, I believe. Or that's been my experience, is speaking to, once you are as clear to the local elected officials, they feel satisfied with that once you explain it.
Well, I know that, having seen setups in other states, one of the things that I was always struck by, definitely a bit of a culture shock initially, is you go to some dispensaries and parking is always going to be at a premium just generally, and who is fielding all the traffic control but off-duty cops who are through a contract, usually a contract with the town, they're able to provide traffic control services. So yeah, it is definitely interesting to see one of the ways that going from policing to providing traffic control for legitimate state-operated businesses. So that's always one of those fascinating things that I've seen. What are some of the benefits municipalities might be able to glean from cannabis legalization and from welcoming a facility into their town?
Well, okay, okay. Well, give you if you would like to have first right.
I mean, I know the most obvious, again, is the additional tax revenue. That is, again, whether it is, as it is written again right now, as Jennifer mentioned, it is the extra 2%, up to 2% tax, sales tax in those municipalities, which is very attractive to them. So that's the tax incentive. The long-term revenue generator that these dispensaries will have. These dispensaries are spending millions of dollars to set up shop in your town. So they're not going to leave soon. They're looking for a permanent home, 10, 15, 20 years. They're planning to be there. So for municipalities, it's very attractive that you don't have to chase them around. It's a good thing. Anchor tenant, we've seen this, that, based on what we have, these are very nice looking dispensaries. They attract other business, whether it's the bakery across the street or around the corner, or the coffee shop of the restaurant, or it attracts because it's a different type of industry. It's a different type of status at this point. New Jersey has given this dispensary a status that is a pretty good one for upcoming communities as well. Mm-hmm. And obviously long-term employment, again, whether it is with decent wages, but again, long-term employment, that is, and these are some of them. So I'll give Scott some other, things that you have. And the last thing I want to say is that I have these points about the real estate property tax. I mean, the average real estate property increase that is happening in some of those numbers I've seen is always 6% is what I've seen in several things, that it goes up. So first of all, this is a misconception for municipalities. They feel like, okay, my property taxes are of my value is going to go down, when in fact all the different documents show, studies show that no, it actually increases money all to the town.
Thank you.
And that's right. I mean, it's like, your crime goes down, property values go up. It's not something that's going to be unique to New Jersey. That's something that's going on that we're measuring in every other state. I mean, it's just a true statement. So there's a lot of benefits that come with it. And look, these dispensaries, they want to be community partners. They know what we know, and right now it's education of folks, right? So they know that there's some folks who are uncomfortable with legalization, medical or adult use or otherwise, right? So these are general concerns that people have. And so you see dispensaries partnering with community leaders, having community discussions. They're talking about the medical efficacy. They're talking about the benefits of this and the benefits of that. As Alexa said early on, I mean, these guys are going to be here for a very long time. And when you're driving around my area, and I'm sure it's in other areas of the state of New Jersey, there's a lot of storefronts that are empty right now that weren't empty 5 months ago. We're going to watch a major transformation in our real estate. And I think people, like I said earlier, mayors who were opposed to this a year ago for political reasons are going to look at this from a practical reason, saying, look, these have been good community partners, and we have 12 operating in New Jersey right now. They can talk to their colleagues. The chief of police can talk to the other chief of police. The mayor can talk to the other mayor. It's just facts. So the fact of the matter is, it's been a positive impact on every town that we've opened up a dispensary in. And it's only going to be more important later on, again, as we start to try to figure out how to recover from COVID, how to recover from this and how to recover from that. Having a stable business that attracts other businesses is going to be something that's very desired.
Now, speaking further to this point, cannabis companies, are showing up and trying to demonstrate that they want to be good neighbors and corporate citizens, for the most part. And one of the things that we've seen in other states, that there are cases where the town, knowing that it has leverage in the position, ends up crafting, as I noticed, you mentioned when I was talking with Jen before, kind of extortionary sort of tactics with respect to host community agreements. So how do we make more of a balancing act of balancing the needs of cannabis companies looking to come in with the needs of the town without providing any sort of excesses in either direction?
It's not unusual so take the cannabis business out of it, just say businesses. Lots of municipalities, particularly if it's a brand new area or a brand new type of business, they're often having discussions at the planning and zoning board level anyway, and they're talking about, hey, can you add this sidewalk here? Hey, can you add this, hey, this parking lot's empty. If you guys could help, create a recreational area. That's something that is part of ongoing dialogue anyway. I think what's going on in Massachusetts sounds more like extortion, but I think as you do go into areas of New Jersey where these dispensaries have sat down at the planning board level, at the zoning level, talking with the mayors, and look, they're gonna come up with something that's going to be mutually beneficial, but it shouldn't be mandatory. I mean, the tax rate's going to be there. The town's going to be able to take advantage of that, and again, that's going to be ongoing year after year after year. But if there's a park that needs a little extra something, or a sidewalk that could be expanded to help facilitate things, that's going to be part of it. I don't like the Massachusetts model, but there generally is some level of integration of ideas and how. Aside from the tax, the dispensary or other part of the business can benefit the town.
Mm-hmm. And even Massachusetts is having issues with that. With that model.
It has. I mean, people have been arrested, right? I mean, it's not like we're just saying commentary here that it feels like extortion. It has actually been documented as extortion in a couple cases.
But also in that same regard too, we've had cases of licensees up in Massachusetts who've tried skirting around the licenses. So it's kind of a free for all for all in some ways, though the state regulators have been able to track down those in excess of the licensing agreements that they set forth. Turning back to taxes, some things are outlined in the upcoming ballot referendum. What do you see as the right tax rate when it comes to adult use cannabis in New Jersey? Is what's set out under the ballot referendum going too low, or is it just the Goldilocks zone for us?
Alexa?
I mean, to me, it sounds to me that is the right amount right now. I mean, the 6% plus the 6.2, I think it is, plus the 2%, up to 2% in town, sounds to me about right. I don't, towns seem okay and attracted to that. I think is not that expensive for consumers either. So, I mean, unless you have something different, but I feel that it's a pretty good balance right now, the way it is.
Yeah, it would be the lowest tax rate in the country on this. So I think when we were talking about the debate going on for the past couple of years on should we tax it at 14%, 19%, 25%,
yeah.
Those look, if it's fair and across the board, and we have some tangible measurement where that money is going towards some community benefit, or particularly in the cannabis space, it's just helping to uplift folks to get into this space. I mean, if there's community grants that could come out of that would make more sense. The tax rate being low the way it is, I mean, well, one thing New Jersey can do and always has the ability of doing is figuring out ways to raise new revenue, right? So if we don't have
we always find ways to tax people.
That's right. Well, it's a fee, so it may turn more into a fee, a community fee, right. Whatever it's going to be. For me, we have to be at or below our counterparts in Pennsylvania, New York, and Connecticut, and Delaware. And as this expands state by state, Governor Wolf just today mentioned that he would like to see adult use all of a sudden. So he's like pushing now. So now he's taking the lead and trying to push his legislature to do that. So right now we have another state knocking on our door. We can't be higher tax rate than them. I think that's a very important fact. But I do think that there's room for a fee, a community fee, or something to that effect that could benefit because it is such a relatively low tax rate. But other components too that are very important is just the price of things. Like we need to make sure that price is affordable for patients and future adult use customers, and so competition will help with that. So we don't want to get too high. And the other thing too is we do want to help make sure that we're bringing down the black market, right? So we don't want to be priced. Right now we're priced sometimes double the black market price on a per ounce basis, and that's something we need to tackle. We need to address. We need to be an affordable product that people are going to gravitate towards.
Yeah, so maybe we need to lower down from the typical, $60 for an eighth, for example, in the current medical program. So I'd like to touch base on social equity before we turn to a question we had come in. How do you see social equity serving as a benefit to towns? And what does it mean for entrepreneurs eager to get into the industry, but who perhaps lack the financial backing that larger multi-state operators might have?
You want to tackle that, Alexa?
You know what? It's been difficult because right now, okay, again, access to capital is always, I mean, it's expensive at this point in the game, and it's expensive, and I don't know how to make it less at this point, because they're trying things that, again, you know, this lawsuit that is holding off this entire process does not make any of this any move faster or cheaper. I mean, these are operators who have money, who had money, and are just spending a lot of money holding properties. So this is making it more expensive. So at this point, I don't really know how you can eventually, once we have a much more clear path to recreational. Again, right now it's medical. Once we have clear guidelines, I think that's when you have the minority, women-owned. They will be able to understand exactly how much money can I put, what are my ways into getting there, and what truly are. Right now, there's a lot of guessing, and it's been a lot of guessing for the last year and 2 years, with even the multi-state operators spending a lot of money in different ways, trying to see if something works, property that may or may not work, speaking to a town and to a mayor who may or may not approve of this. So it's been very expensive, but I do believe that once we have some rules, some written rules that we can easily follow, then people with less funding, you know, may be able to actually get into the game without having that much risk to losing it. And there is going to be, but yeah, at this point, it is very expensive. And I honestly don't have a really great answer for that, because I've been thinking about this and I don't really see it, Scott, unless you have some.
It's been cost prohibitive for the average person, right? So one of the benefits that's happened, we saw it in the last round, they broke up the vertical. So you don't have to just apply for all three, where I had to, in order for me to own a dispensary, I have to also have a cultivation facility and a processing facility. And, you know, and that's the cost burden for the average person trying to get into this space, and also just access to capital, right? So we were talking about that, and until we have, you know, banking at the federal level, the Safe Banking Act, where people can get standard loans or grants from the SBA and others. I mean, right now, if I owned a small business and I wanted to help my brother-in-law or my daughter get involved in this industry or something to that effect, I could borrow off of this and transfer over there, and I could do things that typical businesses do, but we don't have those tools available to us right now. But I think breaking out those licenses, so I don't have to think about how do I raise, you know, $15 million. I might just have to worry about raising $500,000, which if I'm going to open up a liquor store, I'd have to worry about $500,000. So it's not just, you know, it's a cannabis thing, it's anything. You know, if you're going to open up a small business, you have to raise the money. You have to have cash on reserves. I mean, this is more of a Stacey Udell thing from earlier, but she could break it down for you better. But you need to have these things. You have to have your supplies. You have to have your employees. You have to have this, and you have to have that. The cost of starting a business is prohibitive no matter what the industry. But I think the best benefit that we've had in New Jersey is breaking out the vertical structure and allowing people just to go after one component, something that they're passionate about.
Gotcha. We received a question in from the chat. How are town halls and information campaigns vital to getting a local buy-in? How does that work, and how effective are these to changing minds?
I found it to be very effective. I mean, I've been all over the state. I've been in urban areas, suburban areas, rural areas. I've been in these town hall discussions and different types of communities, and the people that come there generally, you know, they're generally genuine. You know, they are. That's redundant, but they are. There's some instigators there on the pro side or the opposing side. But I think more folks you see there are parents, you know, senior citizens, people who are generally concerned, you know, is this going to impact my child? Is it going to impact my community? What about this and what about that? And when you have professionals there that can address medical issues, law enforcement concerns, things of that nature, people generally walk away with this. This is not so bad. Cannabis has been around for 10,000 years, right? It's what I call it the longest clinical trial we've ever had. So we know that our parents, our grandparents, our great grandparents had access to illegal cannabis. And now what we're seeing across the country is being legalized and regulated. And in Jersey, it's going to be done very smartly. So it's just having that dialogue has been very important.
And I would just add one more thing. I mean, I know this is not the most popular thing especially for cannabis and, multi-operators and people who want to get into the business, but, and where the legislation did not happen in springtime last year. But one of the best things that could happen, unfortunately, is that it didn't go in because it's given us enough time to get, communities and towns comfortable with medical. And listen, look at the time that it took for medical to get it, to get it right. Meaning it was still operators are still looking for places. I mean, there's still a lot of things happening even with the medical program. And even communities are still not always comfortable with that. They are much more comfortable with medical. So I feel that now the conversation in terms of recreational has been made much easier because we have time now to, we have the 6 original operators. Now we have this new 6 ones. They are operating at completely different levels, and the standards are much higher. So it's much easier to speak about recreational at this point. And I think that was a huge benefit that happened with spending so much time. I know, again, the idea was, it was thought to be legislation in the spring, but now the conversation is much easier. And I think that it's a good thing right now. I mean, it truly is, to have communities now explain what this is and moving forward on that end.
Thank you. And thank you both. Do you have any final thoughts as we wrap up? Are we positive, or are we cautiously optimistic? Where are we?
I am optimistic. I think again, even if unfortunately COVID-19 has made, the need for this economic boom, economic need much urgent. And so I think we are, so I am optimistic. But work needs to be done. I don't think we need to just sit down and just wait for this referendum to happen and throw our hands up in the air and let's see where it lands. Because if we wanted to land, again, the bigger thing is also legislation. What kind of legislation is going to be drafted after the ballot? And I think that is going to be a big deal based on what the numbers are in November. So yes, optimistic, but we cannot sit around and wait for it just to happen.
Yeah, 100% agree. I think, again, polling is there, just general conversations. Again, now that Pennsylvania, at least I'm a South Jersey guy. So most of our news is what's going on in Philadelphia, not New York City, right? So, but just seeing that that happening, and the urgency of things. So we have this economic insecurity that many of us are feeling right now. Having a brand new industry that's growing, is paying taxes, is hiring people, and contributing to the communities where they're operating in. Those are all very positive things. So for us, it's getting out the vote and targeting key audiences and making sure that suburban moms and urban moms are all in agreement that this is the right thing to do. That we get folks on the religious side, folks on the conservative side, all understanding that. There's something very basic. Like right now, there are 36,000 arrests every year for simple possession. It costs the taxpayers $147 million annually. Wouldn't it be better to generate $300 million in new tax revenue and create 30,000 new jobs? So there's just some common sense things here that, again, as Alex was saying, like they weren't necessarily, grasped by the population last year, but due to COVID, people will have a better understanding of this. And so for us, it's making sure that when they get that ballot sent to their mailbox, that they know where that question is and how to fill it out and how to get it back properly.
Thank you. And thank you both, Alixon and Scott, for joining us today. And really thanks to all of our panelists. This has been a great conversation. If you've enjoyed today's webinar, please, we're going to be doing more of these in advance of the November election. We're looking at least to do probably another 3 more beforehand. But if you liked what you saw today and what you heard today, join us on NJ Cannabis Insider. Become a subscriber, where we have conversations like this every week in the latest issue of NJ Cannabis Insider. Thank you again to our local sponsor, the BGill Group, which is, again, a government affairs and public relations and digital communications firm that's been front and center for the development of the Garden State's medical cannabis initiative and supports a highly regulated adult use cannabis industry. Thank you all to our sponsors and to our panelists for joining us. This has been a pleasure. I'm Justin Zaremba. Stay safe, everyone.